Hello and welcome to video 8 of the Gaia synthesizer, or any subtractive synthesizer. So this is not only a tutorial for the Gaia, but it is also a tutorial for anybody with a subtractive synthesizer who has the basic setups here. We have LFO oscillator, filter, amplifier, low frequency oscillator. And we have various effects here too. But this keyboard it shows a graphic example of what we're doing here. There's no menus, there's no sub menus, so it's kind of an easy way to learn. So this is lessons in subtractive synthesis, but it's also a tutorial on the Roland Gaia. So today we are building a new sound. And today we're trying to build the sound of an electric guitar played clean and an electric guitar played distorted. So we're going to have two different settings today. Instead of trying to make it all work under one patch saving, we're going to save it under two different patches, one for clean and one for distorted. Now this clean guitar can emulate a little bit of an acoustic guitar too, depending on how you set it. So as in all my videos, I'm going to play the sound that I made, and then I'm going to erase them, and we're going to start from the beginning and build up the sound. Here we have the open strings of a guitar. And there you have the clean and the distorted. So we're going to erase these, and we're going to build all of this from the very beginning now. So we're going to hold down the shift key and press right, and that initializes everything. We're going to make sure that the controls are in a neutral position. If you don't understand what I'm doing here, you'll need to go back to one of the first, either the 1 or 2. This is the 8th in the series, so go back to the Gaia series number 1 or number 2, and I'll explain what I'm doing here. So we are now cleaned this completely off, and the only thing you're hearing is this sawtooth wave with absolutely nothing done to it. So here we go. We're going to start building a guitar sound. So I'm going to start with my envelope, or my amplifier envelopes, and basically a guitar is basically just the rise and fall or decay. That's basically all it is. Play staccato, and you hold the note down, you get the open string or the unmuted string of a guitar. Now the only thing I'm going to do is make a small adjustment into sustain. It's not something you can really hear, but it just smooths everything out while you're playing. There's a big difference between just pressing down one note and playing all 6 strings of the guitar at the same time. So we're going to bring the release up. So we're going to end up with no attack, about 3/4 of a decay, just a 1 line up of sustain, and then maybe 4 lines of the release. So instead of this, which is too fast of a release even for a guitar, even a muted guitar. So we're going to just make this a little more playable by putting this little bit of release on there. Now the most important one of this envelope is going to be the decay. As you bring the decay down, your guitar strings are going to ring out a lot less. And if you go too high, the sustain of the guitar strings are way too long. This decay is something you're going to adjust as you play until you get it finally right after everything's adjusted. And you probably want a different setting for a different style of the way you would play the keyboard. As I've said before, the amplifier envelopes, the attack, decay, sustain, release, these envelopes are dependent on how you play. If you're playing really fast, and as you hold them down, it all makes a difference. And also, we're going to change this waveform. Sawtooth isn't the best waveform for the guitar. The closest one I found was we're going to use the square wave, or actually the adjustable square wave called a pulse width. A pulse width is the same, pretty much the same as the square wave, except we get to use this control. This control, the PW, pulse width, only works with the pulse width wave. So the third wave down is the pulse width. So these two controls here only work with the pulse width. They don't work with any of the other waves. So this pulse width gives us a wide range of tones here besides using the filters too. So between the filter and the pulse width controls, we're going to be able to dial in a better guitar sound. So right now I'm going to leave this about halfway up. This other control is a vibrato or modulation of the pulse width. We're not going to use that. That's going to be all the way down today. Okay, so now we're getting closer and closer to the guitar. Now we're going to go to the filter and we're going to dial in the perfect filter setting for the guitar. Now the perfect setting, of course, is whatever you feel your guitar should be. A brighter guitar, a duller guitar, whatever. But the ADSR envelopes are going to change that sound over time so that we don't get the same dull sounding. Basically, it sounds like a synthesizer. It's basically the same sound and it doesn't change over time. So the ADSRs are going to change over the time, and the filter and the resonance are going to change the tonal quality of it. So let's start with our cutoff and resonance. Now for the guitar sound, the only one that really works as far as a filter, we're going to go down to, and we're going to be using the peaking filter today, and the peaking filter is something we haven't used before. And also, this guitar doesn't work unless we bring the slope up to the 24 dB. Almost all synthesizers have adjustable slopes. This one has two, a negative 12 and a negative 24 dB slope. And as you can see, it really doesn't make a whole lot of difference until you start using the filters. So here we go. Now with the peaking filter and this filter adjustment, it's very critical as far as the difference between nasal. There's very little difference. We're talking about in these increments of lines, maybe just a third in between the lines will make a huge difference. Also, it's going to be used in combination with this pulse width control to control the tone. So I'm looking for that. I don't want this. I don't want that nasal tone. I want a stringy sound. So without resonance, it's too dull. There's no stringy sound. So what I end up with, for a peaking filter with this 24 dB slope, it ends up with a cutoff of about 3 o'clock and a resonance of about 10 o'clock. Good place to start. Of course, this is adjusted to your ears and what you think your guitar should sound like. Okay, now I've got my tone, and the tone is going to be, as we build these tones up, we can change this pulse width. And the pulse width is going to basically move it from an electric clean sound, and as we bring it down, it'll get warmer and more down into the acoustic. So up here, we basically got an electric guitar that's not being distorted. And as I bring the pulse width down, it gets warmer. So now we want to affect this filter over time. I'm going to use an attack and decay of about 7 lines up, about 2/3 of the way up. Just a slight, again, amount of sustain, and we're going to bring the release up to match this one. So a lot of times we've used the filter envelopes and matched amp envelopes to get our desired effects, or to get our desired tonal change over time. But today you can see they do not match. We're on completely different on the attack of the filter compared to the attack of the amplifier. And then the delay, or the decay, sustain, and release are about the same. Now, this doesn't take effect until we have to move the envelope depth to get the change. And as I go to the negative depths, I get synthesizer effects. But as I go up into the positive, you can hear it's brighter, and as I move this up, it's a more controlled. It's not so bright. It's not so brittle. And what happens is it changes over time. It starts with a little more filter, and then the filter releases over time and goes back to that more brittle sound. And that gives us a nice stringy sound. And that's pretty much our guitar sound. And I'm going to use a latch or hold function, use an Arpeggio. Unless you listen to how this sounds. As I bring the pulse width down, it's more acoustic. As I bring it up, it's more electric guitar. So we're about in the middle there, in between electric and acoustic. Now we're going to add a delay and a reverb right away, so we got a feeling of what this sounds like. So we're going to add just a slight amount of delay and a slight amount of reverb. I've also got a sustain pedal hooked up to here, so when you see my hands being released like this and you get a sustain, it's because the pedal's pushed down. Otherwise it's staccato. You want to, with a synthesizer, you want as many controls as possible, so make sure you get a pedal here hooked up. If you haven't bought one, go ahead. You should buy one. This pedal here is just an on-off switch. It's very cheap. It's only like 15 bucks. But it's well worth having to control. Okay, so we got a little bit of delay. We got a little bit of reverb on there now. So right now I want to go into a section we haven't covered before, and this is a part of the Roland. We can adjust the modulation lever. We could take that boingy thing out of there. So all modulation levers on synthesizers are adjustable. So on the Roland, we have to hold down the shift key, move the modulation lever all the way forward until the shift key is blinking. Now that it's blinking, I can make I can make changes to my LFO. And we're going to use, for this clean sound, we're going to use the sine wave, the second one down. So we're looking for a vibrato that kind of a slow vibrato, just for the clean sound. So my LFO now is now controlling, the modulation lever is controlling my LFO. So as I move the lever forward, I get my vibrato. So I've decided on a sine wave shape. I'm going to use the pitch depth. In other words, I'm using the pitch instead of the amplifier. We're using the pitch back and forth to create the vibrato instead of the amplifier. And I've got a rate there of about 1 o'clock on the rate dial. So now we can do little slides. Little slides with our guitar. And that is pretty much the completion of our first tone. We're going to be building out of 3 tones today. Very little difference between tone 1 and 2. It's going to be just, they're just going to be there so I can pan them into a stereo effect. Also, when you combine the 2 tones, you actually get more volume out of this synthesizer. So when you're recording, or your amplifiers don't have to work as hard if you get more output out of this. So I'm ready to copy 1 to 2. So you can hear we got more volume now since the 2 tones are amplifying each other. So the only thing we're doing with tone 2 is a little bit of panning. And the way we pan, I have to turn the flashing cancel light off because I'm finished editing the LFO link to the modulation lever. So before we do any work on number 2, let's do a quick review, because number 1 is basically the whole setup, and tone 2 and 3 will be very little change. So here's just tone 1. And we created our guitar by starting with a pulse width wave and bringing our pulse width adjustment up to about halfway. Then we went to our amplifier and we used no attack, and about 2/3 of the way up on decay, just a tiny little bit of sustain, and about 3 or 4 lines up of the release, or about on this about a quarter release. Then we went to our filter and we did something new today that we haven't done in this series yet, and we're using a peaking filter with a 24 decibel slope. The 24 is the lighted slope on the Roland. Then we used a cutoff of the peaking filter at around 3 o'clock and a resonance around 10 o'clock to achieve our stringy tone sound. Then we use the ADSR envelopes, attack, decay, sustain, release, to create a little bit of a change in the tone over time. So if you're playing staccato, the envelopes don't work. As you play and let the notes and let those strings ring out, then we get a slight tonal variation as the tone is played and it slowly decays out, and that gives it a little more character. And then we also did something different today. For the first time, we've actually assigned the modulation lever, and we've actually edited it by editing the LFO to the modulation lever. So as we push the lever forward, that's our modulation on the Gaia, and it goes back and forth. That's the bender. So instead of having that unrealistic modulation, we actually made our own modulation for the lever by holding down the shift key, moving the modulation lever all the way forward, getting a blinking shift cancel light, and then going through and editing our LFO to get our modulation lever linked to the LFO. And our LFO was a sine wave with about one line down of pitch depth into the negative pitch depth, and our rate is around 1 o'clock. Then when we had this done, we copied to tone 2. So that's just a copy. So tone 2 and tone 1, tone 1's got all the adjustment. The only thing we're doing to tone 2 is we're going to pan left and right between tone 1 to get us just a little bit bigger image, a little bit bigger stereo effect. You don't need to do this if you're going to record mono. So on tone 2, I'm going to hold down the shift key so that I can get panning, and the detune pot becomes a pan. As soon as I hit shift and hold it down, here, it's become a pan. So I'm going to put about a 10 o'clock position on tone 2 and a 2 o'clock position on tone 1. So now when they're combined together, we have a bigger sound and a little more stereo effect. And we're going to finish up now with tone 3, copying 2 to 3. We're going to return the pan by holding the shift key down. Detune knob goes back to 0. So we're centered for tone 3, because tone 3 is simply going to be we're going to move to the sine wave just to give us a little warm addition to tone 1 and 2. So here's tone 1 by itself, here's with tone 2, and here's with a little warmth added. And right now I'm going to write it. I'm going to write that. So we're all saved. And I'm going to use a key hold and arpeggio. Okay, so we're going to save this patch now with tone 1 and 2 edit lights on and tone 3 edit lights off. So now when I turn this patch on, I'll have all 3 tones. But as I change, as you fine tune this to you, getting some cables distorting. So let's put the arpeggio on. And as I move this, as I move the pulse width, what I'm going to be doing is moving the pulse width levered up and down so you can hear how the guitar is going to go from electric to acoustic. So that gives you just one lever, or one slider. To make quick, easy tonal adjustments. You really don't want to use the cutoff filters because that's so fine-tuned that you'll immediately lose it. So the easiest way is just to move this pulse width slider up and down to go between the guitar sounds. And you also have the option of turning that bass off. To get different sounds too. The bass sound might be too muddy for recording, and you'll turn that off so that the mix with the rest of the instruments would sound better. And there we have our clean guitar. So at this point, we can save it with those 2 edit lights on. Now we can save it with or without this 3rd tone. It's up to you. Because when you write this, this is what's going to come up. So when you press your button, you can have 2 tones or 3 tones come up. And of course we want 1 and 2 edit lights on. So write, patch number 3, write again. And that's how I'm saved, and that's how it's going to come up. And that pretty much completes our clean guitar. So let's move on to the distorted guitar, and we're going to do that by I'm going to take my patch 4 and I'm going to take 3 and write it on the 4. I do that by pressing right. We've been working on patch 3, now I'm going to patch 4, right. Now patch 3 is copied to patch 4. So now we're going to add a distorted guitar from this clean guitar. And one way, some of the adjustments we're going to make will be only on 1 and 2. Tone 3 is just something to make it a little warmer. So we're not going to even touch that. So we're going to be making edits on 1 and 2 to make our distorted guitar, and we're going to, of course, be using the distortion effect. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to turn the slope off for the distorted guitar. And if you move to a green light variation of the pulse width, you pick up a little distortion right there, so we don't have to do all the distortion from the effects. Here's the difference. Quite a difference there on the variation of the pulse width wave. Okay, now we're ready to add the distortion, which is this button here. But we have two controls, but with the shift key there's actually 4 knob controls for each one of these effects. So let's start our distortion off. So let's start our distortion with the control 1 and level at the 12 o'clock position. Now, as I hold down the shift key, control 1, the left knob, gives you different kinds of distortion. There's one kind. There's another. There's another. Another. And another. You can hear they're all different. So we're going to pick not the brightest one, which is hold down the shift key and turn it all the way over to the right. That's about the most brittle one of them. So I'm going to pick that one. And that's by holding down the shift key and moving control 1 to the 10 o'clock position. Now, so that's the behind the panel control. By holding the shift key, we're controlling what type of distortion. Now we're going to control the color of the distortion with the knob, the level knob, by holding down the shift key. So let's hold down the shift key and turn that all the way to the left. And now I'm going to turn it all the way to the other side. So you can hear how much tone was taken out of there now. So I'm going to turn that to the 12 o'clock position. Okay, so behind the scenes, or behind the panel, is holding down the shift key. Control 1 controls the type, and the level knob controls the color or tone characteristics of the distortion. Now without the shift key, control 1 and control 2 go back to their normal functions. So now our control 1 and level, I got control 1 at 3 o'clock and level at 12 o'clock to get this distortion effect. Now if that's too bright for you, remember you can just hold down the shift key and level knob becomes a tonal knob. And as we bring up an octave here, we can get so I'm using my modulation lever to pitch bend and to modulate the so now we got the same modulation we had for the clean guitar. So we don't want that for the distorted one. I really don't want the even one because I'm going to use it almost like a feedback control. So what we're going to do, again, we're going to edit the modulation lever by holding down the shift key, moving it all the way forward. We get a flashing shift key. Now this is active. So I'm going to change my wave shape to random, the bottom one here. And I'm going to turn the edit off by clicking this. So now our modulation for the distorted guitar has changed to something better for the distorted guitar. Now when playing the distorted guitar, you may want, in the solo, you may want more, a higher decay level. As you bring that up, and we're going to go back down. So now we got a really long decay on there. So it depends on how you're playing. You'll adjust your decay to match. And that's why we saved it with tone 1 and 2 on, so that the edits are happening to both at the same time. So now that our distorted guitar is pretty much ready, we're going to write it to number 4. So that's write, patch 4, write again. So now we have So now we have our two patches, 3 and 4, to control. I did arpeggio, so we're going to do a little quick arpeggio lesson here. There's a lot of different arpeggios to pick from. The key hold here is just a latch, so I can remove my hand while I'm playing around. So this is kind of just a simple up pattern. If we hold the arpeggio down, we can select from 8 different arpeggios or 8 different banks. So that's 64 different arpeggios you can pick from. So let's try bank 4, arpeggio 4. As you can see, I'm holding the arpeggio button down and picking different patches. Well, not patches, but arpeggios. So let's hold the last one. And the arpeggio is also controlled by tempo, so you can tap your tempo in to get a different tempo. And there we have the clean and distorted guitar. This has been number 8, and thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.